Tonight on Politics Unplugged, a fiery week at the state legislature as they debated the budget. And in the end, lawmakers ended up passing the largest tax cut in Arizona history. That story ahead, plus...
We're delighted to go back to the Hill and begin earning more support from both Republicans and Democrats to get this bill across the finish line.
Progress at the state capitol as Congress works to pass an infrastructure bill. The key role Arizona Senator Kirsten Sinema played in helping reach a bipartisan agreement with the White House.
We want to restore confidence in our election system so that people want to engage in it and vote.
And Arizona's Secretary of State's race is getting crowded. We're talking to one of the candidates who's campaigning to take control of one of the most important positions in the state. That's all ahead on Politics Unplugged. And good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. And we begin tonight's show with that Secretary of State's race being very closely watched here in Arizona. Now, right now, there are 5 candidates who have declared they are running for this office. On the Democratic side, it's House Minority Leader Reginald Boulding and former Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes. Now, over on the Republican side, it's State Representatives Shauna Bullock and Mark Fincham, along with State Senator Michelle Ugenti-Rita. And Senator Ugenti-Rita joins me right now to discuss her campaign. First of all, thank you very much for joining us here today. And first question, just tell our viewers why you're running and what you want to accomplish.
Of course. Well, let me set the stage for you. So early on in my legislative career, I recognized how important election integrity and secure elections are to having a thriving democracy. That's why I have championed some of the biggest election reform bills in the state of Arizona. It's why I was able to convince my colleagues in the House of Representatives to chair the Elections Committee years ago. I currently chair the Elections and Government Committee now in the Senate. And that's why I'm running for Secretary of State, to be the voice of the voter. I'm going to re-energize that office. I'm going to put the voter first, because we don't have anything unless we have elections people want to participate in, believe in, and are secure. Now,
of course, we do know you're behind some of the more high-profile election bills, including this year, the one that would make the permanent early voter list, or makes the permanent early voter list not permanent anymore. It would kick off anybody from that list who did not vote in 2 different election cycles. Now, you have referred to this as election reform, but some Democrats, some critics are saying this is another piece in in voter suppression. How do you respond to that criticism about this being a tactic to try to suppress the vote in certain areas of the state?
Dennis, it is completely made up. It's rhetoric. They're trying to scare the public, and it's not going to happen. The public is savvy. I've worked with the public and other stakeholders for, again, many, many years to advance election integrity. And I'm not going to let the Democrats misconstrue election bills that I've sponsored so that they can game the system. They provide no solutions. All they do is demagogue an issue and invoke fear.
So regarding election integrity, now, if you were to be elected to this office, what would you be pushing for at the legislature? What kind of changes would you be making?
Well, first off, I would be looking at the election procedural manual. As you know, that is the instructional manual that the Secretary of State's office is responsible for putting together. Right now, it's bloated. It goes over and beyond the scope of the manual, and I would bring it back in line with its statutory obligation. I'd also be pushing back on the federal government as they try to federalize our elections. And then I would be working with the legislature to make sure that we're drafting bills that advance election integrity and security. There's no reason why these efforts shouldn't be bipartisan. Sadly, they're not, but I have a reputation of making sure I get these bills across the finish line because I know how to defend them. I know how to work with my colleagues, and that's exactly the kind of skill set and experience I'll bring to the office.
Well, let's talk about the biggest story regarding election security, integrity, however you want to frame that here in Arizona over the past several months, and that has been that voting audit of Maricopa County's ballots that's been happening down at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Do you think this was an effort, a project that needed to be done?
I do. Look, I don't think it's irresponsible to want to make sure we check and use an audit to verify that our elections are run correctly. That's an appropriate response to elections that were wrought with confusion and a lot of criticism. And so I'm so proud of the Senate for stepping up and initiating the audit.
So confusion and criticism, but did you see any problems, any evidence of anything, untoward that wasn't up to par, that you saw questionable with these elections? Did you see anything like that last year?
Well, often this is something that I've been very critical of, and it's the timing. I mean, to get these election results takes a lot of time in Arizona. It's embarrassing. These should be far more efficient. There should be a lot more timely results. So I think that plays into people who perhaps start to grow skepticism in the management and administration of elections. Then we have mail-in balloting, where people are getting multiple ballots, or ballots are being sent to the wrong house. So these are examples of why you should go back and look and make sure things are run appropriately. I mean, honestly, what is the problem with that?
But where's the evidence of the widespread voter fraud to initiate an audit like this? Because you're talking about timing of votes. This audit has went way over budget as far as time, and it's taken quite a bit of time.
So are you suggesting because it takes quite a bit of time, we shouldn't do it? I mean, that's not what the public wants the legislature to do, which is to sit out and bury its head. That's what the County Board of Supervisors has done for well over a decade, and that's why we're here. We wouldn't be here if those that were responsible for the administration of our elections were running them appropriately. But the public sped up. And so, again, the Senate stepped in, and I'm proud that the Senate did that.
And are you happy with the way this audit has been run, and are you going to trust the results that come out of this?
Well, I need to see what the end results are, and I'm anxious to get the report, just like everybody else. It will be released to the public, and we'll take it from there.
But again, I just want to press you a little bit again. If you've been happy with the way this has been run, considering that the firms that have been hired for this don't have any election experience, particularly the one that's in charge of all this, cyber ninjas?
Well, the only one that's obsessed with this audit and the way it's being managed is the press. The public wants someone in charge of elections that's going to bring back integrity and security. That's what I'm going to do. I'm anxious to get the results. And I also believe that an audit is an appropriate tool to utilize when you want to make sure things are done right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Michelle Ugenti-Rita, she is running for the Republican nomination for Secretary of State of Arizona. Thank you very much for your time. And still ahead, thanks, Arizona politicians under fire. Senator Kirsten Sinema getting some heat for her support of the filibuster, whereas Governor Ducey is being criticized by President Trump. We'll break it all down next. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Senator Kirsten Sinema is facing criticism for defending the filibuster. Some Democrats have been pushing to eliminate the rule, which requires 60 votes to advance the bill in the Senate. This week, a group of protesters gathered at the senator's office here in the Valley.
And the filibuster! And the filibuster! And the filibuster! And the filibuster! And the filibuster!
And they were asked to leave by the property owner, and when they didn't, police were called. 10 people were arrested and cited. And with me now to discuss this is Ron Hansen, reporter for the Arizona Republic. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, before we get into all this, kind of explain to us why so many progressive Democrats particularly want to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, they really see this as being a straitjacket that will prevent the Biden agenda from proceeding very far. And there is a sense of limited opportunity to do much in Washington at all. The fact is they have big plans on things from immigration to healthcare to infrastructure and such, and they see the legislative filibuster as a hurdle to getting there because it requires cooperation from Republicans who Democrats think are not going to bargain in good faith. Yeah,
and Democrats, and I should say Kirsten Sinema has been pretty upfront for quite a while that she supports keeping the filibuster. But what reignited this whole controversy this week with her was an op-ed piece that she penned for the Washington Post in which she defended the filibuster by saying basically what?
Well, she continues to cling to the idea that this is something that is a national tradition, that this is something that is essential to a proper functioning government. And it really has, again, I think, angered people who see this as politically naive. They don't understand how she can operate this way in a Washington that has shown itself again and again to be incapable of those things.
And so, but then she kind of got, I don't know if you want to call it a gift because she did work on this, but Sinema was also a member of this bipartisan group of senators who struck an infrastructure deal, at least a framework with the White House this week. Now, here's what Sinema said following the announcement that the group, after the group reached this deal. All right, so sorry about that. We didn't have the soundbite there, but basically, after saying and fighting for the filibuster, in saying that this promotes bipartisanship, she comes out and says, look at this great bipartisanship deal that we got on filibuster. This really bolsters her case, doesn't it?
Well, it is. It's the kind of thing that she is pointing to very prominently as evidence that, see, Republicans and Democrats can work together on meaningful legislation. And that is, it's consistent with her political brand. And it came fortuitously at a time when back home, clearly there was great unrest, especially among those on the left. It's worth noting, though, that, infrastructure was something that was always seen as possible during the Trump era. And frankly, if both parties could have agreed on a funding mechanism, we might have already seen something on that front. This was seen as sort of low-hanging fruit. The question is whether it can be exported to other issues that will be perhaps more contentious.
All right, and final question on the Sinema thing is this: Politics Unplugged. We talk about politics here. Is this going to have a lasting political effect on her standing? I mean, we're still 3 years away from her facing voters again, but is this something that these people will remember?
She's going to try and make sure that people do remember this. This was a $1.2 trillion plan. We'll have to see what the final details work out to be and what the final figure winds up with. But that's still an awful ambitious kind of legislative achievement that she clearly has her fingerprints all over this. This was not easy. The White House couldn't do it working directly with Republicans. So she's going to make sure that Arizona voters consider this when they consider her in 2024.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit right now. There's also this growing feud between Governor Ducey and former President Donald Trump. Ron, can you weigh in on this? Again, we see the former president coming after Republican Governor Doug Ducey, who, whether you like him or don't, really stood by this president in 2020, helped campaign for him, stumped with him throughout the state last year. What is behind all this?
This is something that is both personal and political, I think. In former President Donald Trump's case, this is something that is very personal. He lost Arizona. It was the narrowest loss in the country for him. And there was a sense of great irritation when Governor Ducey, certified the election instead of taking his phone call. This is something that contributes to the sense of grievance that election reforms are needed in places like Arizona and other states, and that Governor Ducey has not fallen into line on that. In the governor's case, this is someone who is trying to turn the page and get back to doing what his political brand has been about for years now, and it's about conservative and competency. They're trying to get points on the board, and in particular with the legislation on tax cuts and such, this is checking the box that Governor Ducey promised voters back in 2014 when he first ran for office.
And, the thing that really kick-started this whole thing, at least for the president to lash out at Ducey again, was apparently there was a phone call in which Ducey was asked whether he was considering running for the Senate. And he once again said he is currently not running for the Senate. Let me ask you, what are you hearing from the political types out there? Do you think Ducey is still weighing his options, that he might jump into this race at the last minute? Because it's the use of that present tense that has got people kind of raising an eyebrow, go, well, yeah, technically you aren't running right now. That doesn't mean you won't be running in the future.
Yeah, I think the governor has been around politics long enough to know that he doesn't close doors and lock them tight if he doesn't have to. I think his preference is for other things, but he is keeping his options open, I suspect. And there is a sense among Republicans that they are still searching for the perfect candidate to challenge Mark Kelly in the Senate race next year. I think that the governor has his preferences, and I don't think that that's necessarily in a Senate context, but he's also diplomatic enough and savvy enough to know that you don't just say no until you must.
All right. I want to thank you very much for joining us. That was Ron Hansen with the Arizona Republic, keeping us up to date on all that federal political stuff. Thank you very much for joining us here on the show here today. And after weeks of debate, the state legislature passed one of the largest tax cuts in state history. Our panel breaks down the Arizona budget battle next here on Politics Unplugged. And it was a fiery week at the Capitol as lawmakers worked to push a budget through. The sticking point initially was on the budget was that $1.5 billion tax cut that Republicans wanted and Democrats didn't. But in the end, this historic cut ended up passing through the legislature. Now, with me to discuss all this and the latest in the budget is Julia Shumway with the Arizona Capitol Times and Andrew Oxford from the Arizona Republic. And I want to start with you, Julia. You pulled an all-nighter in the Senate this week. Congratulations for surviving that. But tell us what's in this. What changes were made to this, $1.5 billion, $1.9 billion tax cut? What were the changes made to get this through?
So the biggest changes are that the tax cut is going to be a little bit smaller and it's going to take a little longer to phase in. A couple Republicans, Senator Paul Boyer and Representative David Cook, were both very opposed to the idea of tax cuts at this scale of $1.9 billion by the end of the third year if we don't know what state revenues are going to look like. So now the full 2.5% single tax rate might not be phased in until 2025 or after that, depending on how well the state's doing at collecting revenue.
Yeah, and again, there was that concern for cities and towns. They thought they were going to get shifted there on some state shared revenue money. They moved the percentage from 15% of the state shared revenues up to 18% for those cities and towns. And Andrew, what were they saying at the end of the day after the Senate passed this budget?
I mean, after the Senate passed the budget, obviously that helped shore up the Republican support that was needed, but still didn't bring along any Democratic support, didn't, address any of their concerns. Democrats were still arguing that this would amount to a big reduction in general fund revenues and particularly affecting, the next administration. So while, a big victory for Governor Ducey, critics are raising questions about what comes for the governor after him.
Well, let me ask you, too, because Democrats were talking about how this was a big giveaway to the rich, to the wealthy here in Arizona. You've seen some of the numbers, the analysis out there. Who benefits the most from this tax cut? Start with you, Andrew.
Proponents will say everybody's going to get a little bit of a benefit here, right? But if you look at the way that this is charting out, folks earning a few tens of thousands of dollars a year will see fairly marginal benefit, a few dollars, maybe a few dozen dollars. Really, the biggest benefits are going to be for people who are earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
And Julia, the night that you were down there in the state Senate, there were a whole host of amendments that were made. What stuck out to you as you were sitting there on the floor through the night?
So I think the biggest is that we had one single amendment to an education bill that was 195 pages. There were delays throughout the night just because they needed to proofread and print off copies of this giant amendment that included a number of bills that had already died in either chamber. We had bills trying to stop schools from teaching subjects related to critical race theory or expanding vouchers to a number of students across Arizona, a bill that may have trouble in the House. And they wanted to cram all of this into the budget at the last minute. We also had a number of dramatic election changes shortly after 10:30 p.m. on that Tuesday, including creating provisions for watermarked ballots, making plans for what's going to happen after the Senate's audit is done, and investigating Twitter and Facebook if they block conservative candidates from getting their message out.
Now, I want to get back to the election stuff here in a second, but first I want to ask Andrew, education in the House. It seems like that was the one budget bill that the House could not get done and get through with and get the support for on Thursday when they were voting through these budget bills. Give us, what was the holdup? What was the sticking point there with this education bill?
The revival to expand the state school voucher program was a very big sticking point. You know, this would be an expansion to include about an estimated 60% of school students, or potentially include them in the state's ESSA program. And that's not something that a number of Republicans would be able to support in the House. There's been a lot of attention on where Representative Michelle Udall, Representative Joel John would come down on this. Michelle Udall has been critical of expanding the ESSA program in the past. And so that's been a major sticking point, trying to put that big provision into the bill here at the last minute as we're coming down to the deadline for a budget.
And that ESA, just for viewers who may not be that familiar with it, that is where you are given money, taxpayer money, to send your child to a public or to a private parochial school. To move forward on that. Now, Andrew, now also the voters, they rejected something similar to this just a couple of years ago, didn't they?
That's right. And that's been another major criticism of trying to shoehorn this into the budget right now. This didn't have the votes to pass earlier in the session. And so this is kind of a last minute push to make this happen. But between, like I said, the opposition you have from some Republican members and the opposition that we've seen from the voters, this has been a major roadblock to getting that last piece of the budget through the House.
All right, and I promised to get back to some of that election stuff, so I want to get back to you, Julia. What was some of the biggest election changes that were made in the bill, and how are they going to affect those elections during those midterms next year?
One of the biggest, although this isn't mandated yet, would be switching to having ballots that look a little more like money. So with holographic watermarks, all sorts of anti-counterfeit measures, because a number of Republicans and their supporters are convinced without evidence that people were able to copy and duplicate ballots during the 2020 elections. There's also provisions in here to allow a state task force to investigate social media websites that they believe are providing in-kind contributions to Democratic candidates and not reporting them. President Donald Trump or current state representative Jake Hoffman off of Twitter for spreading what those sites determined was misinformation. And those are probably two of the biggest changes. County election officials don't really know how they're going to implement some of these. They haven't been looped in on how to plan for, say, having an entirely new set of state mandated ballots.
And it seems like it's just a whole lot, again, just jammed into this budget. There's been some criticism that, a budget is mostly deals with, it's just a state spending plan, but they're making a lot of major policy decisions and shoving that into the budget. Andrew, can you talk to us a bit about this? We normally see some of that kind of stuff in a budget, but this seems to be a whole lot this year.
Right. Well, you have to remember there's been a lot of wrangling just to get the budget in the position it's in right now, right? There's been a real struggle to keep the Republican caucuses together, keep them moving on this budget. We saw, the legislature basically recessing a couple of weeks ago because they couldn't get to an agreement. So I think a lot of what you're seeing now at the last minute are concessions to various members to, bring back maybe a bill that faltered earlier in the session, bring back a bill that didn't have the votes earlier in the session, try to get that into the budget to try and get some support to get this budget across the line.
All right, I'm so sorry, Andrew, I'm going to have to kind of cut you off right there because we are out of time, and that is it for us tonight. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged.